I would like to briefly outline what we are going to talk today. And first of all, well, everything will be about the impact of COVID-19 and the respective measures, lockdowns in EU countries and third process countries on the labor migrants. And when everything started, the situation, the developments were very fast moving, changing, and the first issue that concerned the labor migrants was the return options, because for some reasons, some migrants wanted to go back home to renew the documents. For some cases, the documents expired. So the second issue we're going to discuss is also the legalization of stay of those people whose documents expire or visa-free expired the number of days. Of course, we're going to talk also about the labor migrants developments, because this is the main reason why migrants come to the host country to earn money. And of course, the COVID-19, as everybody knows, some economy sectors were in disaster, some economic sectors were vice versa flourishing. And of course, these changes could not but affect the labor migrants. We're gonna talk about two special cases, the Ukrainian domestic workers in Italy and seasonal workers in Poland, just because they are so important for three countries, Italy, Poland, and Ukraine. And at the end, we're gonna talk also about the importance of effective communication, because the situation, as I said, developed very quickly, and it was important for people to understand their rights, their opportunities, their choices, what should they do to make the rational and well-grounded decision whether to come back home, where to find a job, and so on and so forth. And at the end, we're going to talk about the potential challenges after easing the lockdown. At the time of writing the brief that was mentioned, we spotted the challenges on the basis of those measures that were adopted at that time. Now we're gonna, and we can look a little bit further, considering that the countries in focus here are the easing lockdowns, and some countries even lifted the lockdown, and there is now the transition period for them. So all the lessons from these countries might be also adapted and considered, at least by other countries as well. So though we focus on 4 countries, I will tell right now which countries. It doesn't mean that those best practices cannot be distributed to other ones. So we're gonna focus on 4 countries. It's Poland, Italy, Czech Republic, and Hungary. And this is mainly because these are the main destinations for Ukrainian labor migrants in the European Union. And as you can see from the data from the Eurostat and on this graph and the state statistics service survey, it clearly shows that the Poland is basically the major destination and has the highest numbers considering all the other countries, and then a little bit less in Italy, a little bit less in Czechia, and even less in Hungary. So these are the countries of our focus for today. And now I can give the mic to my colleague, Pavlo Kravchuk.
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you for taking your time for this extremely important to my mind topic, and I would like to underline one more time why we are focusing on Ukrainian labor migration and on its significance for the whole Europe. Not all of its effects are measurable, and unfortunately we have a strong demand and a strong lack of some statistics of research of the Ukrainian labor migration effects, of its size, of numbers. But still we have some effects measured, and we can tell that definitely Ukrainian labor migration is providing workforce supply for the countries that feel the lack of working force in some fields, and we can measure the economic impact of Ukrainian labor migration to Poland's economy. You can see its contribution to the gross domestic product growth and to Ukrainian economy. Especially in 2019, the remittances of labor migrants were over 7% of the gross domestic product. And on the next slide, we can see how the pandemics started. It illustrates the suddenness and the abruptness of the situation that was faced by Ukrainian labor migrants in the countries in focus. As we all know, Italy was the first in Europe to face the severe restrictions, but actually in just one decade in March, almost all Europe went to lockdown, and thousands of people found themselves stuck in their host countries, found themselves locked. Many of them have lost the job, many of them have their documents expired or were going to be expired. And one of the main factors that impacted the situation of Ukrainian labor migrants in these countries. Currently, as Ruslan have already mentioned, we observe the serious easings of lockdowns in all countries, but still I would like to accent that we have no, actually we cannot tell how the situation will develop in the next months, and if there will be the second wave of the pandemic, or if there will be necessity to return these restrictions, and how the situation will develop. And actually what we would like to present today is a modeling of some future scenarios of some issues that will be raised by the further development of the situation. So please, next slide. Thank you. As Ruslan mentioned, one of the first challenges that was faced by Ukrainian labor migrants was their return. After almost all countries in Europe have suddenly locked their borders, many of countries have suspended the public transport. In particular, Ukraine has suspended all international regular passenger transport, including buses, trains, and flights. The first thing was transport. We infiltrated in some social media groups of Ukrainians abroad, and we observed the very high demand for people were struggling just to find a way to return home. They were trying to find some cars to join someone's journey. They were ready to pay very big money as for Ukrainian labor migrants just to have a chance to return home. The second big challenge was queues on the border. As Ukraine has closed its borders, almost all border crossing points in the mid-March. And for example, on the Polish border, only 2 were functioning as of that time. And people were desperately trying to return home. So we have found ourselves in the situation when a lot of people simultaneously arrived to the border, and many of these people had no cars. They arrived by buses or other kinds of transport, and Ukraine also suspended the pedestrian crossing. So on the next slide, we can see one of the effects of this situation. when on March 27, thousands of Ukrainians gathered at the Kravchuk border crossing points. You can see that it was it has nothing to do with the security, with epidemic security, with protection, with social distancing. It was just a big gathering that was that should be managed in terms of crisis management, actually. And the next challenge is all the situation have caused the appearance of illegal transport schemes on border. As I have already mentioned, a lot of people have been returning home by arriving to the border, and they should cross somehow the border. Considering the situation that pedestrian crossing was suspended, they should found some other transport. It can be car, for example, someone's car who is riding it, or it there suddenly appeared some buses of unknown origin that were transporting people through the border control only. It's like 500 meters of distance, and that were taking quite a big sum of money for this from people. And actually no one knows who are those people who are driving these buses, who are receiving the income from this situation. So, and the last challenge that is still actual is the overstay penalization on the border, and we will return to it later. It's as we all know, currently most of states, actually all considered states, have legalized the stay of Ukrainian, and not only Ukrainian labor migrants who have their documents expired. So can you please return to the legalization of stay? But still, Ukrainian labor migrants face a situation when their stay with expired documents is legalized in, for example, Italy or Czech Republic, but when returning home to Ukraine, they are penalized on the border. Actually, considering the data we have, it happens mostly on Hungarian border when exiting the European Union. But I suggest that probably in other countries, the situation can be the same, and we should consider the possibility to better communication between European countries regarding the prolongation of residence permits, visas, and other documents on the period of pandemic. Almost all European countries have legalized stay of migrants and foreigners who have their documents expired, but there was, I would say, a certain sequence of priorities. First, the resident permits owners and the visa owners were in the focus of this legalization. And for example, people who entered Poland visa-free and have their term of stay expired, they were their situation was considered a little bit earlier by the government. And the last thing, irregular stay, I think Ruslan will talk more about it later, because this category of foreigners was also considered by Italian government. Next slide, please. Returning to the topic of overstay penalization when leaving the European Union, I would like to draw attention to the good practice that was introduced in Czechia on 4th of May. When leaving the Czech Republic, foreigners may ask the police officer to put a special stamp in their passport that confirms that their overstay in the Czech Republic was caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. So on the next slide, we can see the example of this stamp that was put to the passport of Ukrainian citizen. And considering the situation, this is quite a good practice because we have numerous messages from Ukrainian citizens regarding who were penalized, who were obliged to pay some fines because of their overstay, which was not voluntary at all. And even now, when the situation has eased, these complaints still are present in these social media groups we observe. Returning to labor market development, I would like to highlight the fact that the pandemic has shown the specific vulnerabilities of labor migrants. I mean, when the pandemic has come and restriction has come to effect, a lot of businesses were closed, many people have lost their working places, and in this situation, labor migrants who are much less flexible in changing their job than the natives, they faced especially strong challenge. For example, in most countries in focus, people with working permits should have, if their working permit is tied to a specific company or a specific employer, and this is why they have to change the job, they have to provide, they have to apply for an alternative work permit. The only exception is Italy, that allows to change job and to seek for a new job for a period up to a year. Also, we found an interesting and in some way paradoxical situation in Poland, because people hired by temporary working agencies who were considered to be in precarious situation all the time before the pandemic, they after the pandemic starts, suddenly they found themselves in better positions than many other employees, because formally they are working for the temporary work agency, not the specific company, and it allowed them to simply change their workplace, and therefore they became better protected. Now situation seems to become better. The situation seems to improve. All countries considered are easing their restrictions. For example, in Ukraine, we have now the public and international transport resumed. Poland yesterday has introduced some easings. Still, I think that even if we not face the second wave of the pandemic, we have to consider some specific facts regarding the future of the world and the future of labor migration in Europe after the pandemic ends. Firstly, one of the biggest problems that for Ukrainian labor migrants is now how to leave Ukraine, actually. On the beginning of the pandemic, it was how to return, now it's how to leave. Because transport is still not accessible to all. And for example, we had a number of stories when European countries that had a very strong demand for seasonal workers were trying to organize charter flights for Ukrainian workers to bring them to the host countries, but in Ukraine it was these charter flights faced a lot of restrictions, bureaucratic procedures, some untransparent procedures, I would say, and it caused quite a lot of problems. And the situation, for example, with workers who were about to leave Ukraine to work in Britain, all these people arrived to the airport, and suddenly the flight was suspended by the state aviation service. And only after long negotiations on the governmental level, this flight was allowed. Second issue is the future of the short-term circular migration, which is one of the actually a large share of Ukrainian migrants, especially the ones who arrive to Poland, are short-term circular migrants who work for up to 90 or for up to 180 days and then return home. Also, a large share of borderland residents are working in Poland or other countries, Hungary, Slovakia, in the mode of, for example, 5-day working and back to the weekend. And in the situation of widespread of COVID-19, and if it stays as dangerous as now it is, the logic of the necessity and the possibility of this intensive short-term travels between countries is doubtful a bit, and quite probably that it will lead to change in the character of migration. So the long-term migration will become more popular and more accessible. And another one thing, which is actually mostly for Poland, is the perspective of migration authorities overload after the easing the lockdown. As we know, in Poland, so-called Tarcza antykryzysowa, the anti-crisis shield, it's a set of laws designed to respond to the pandemic. It allowed foreigners who have their documents and stay expired to stay in Poland up to 30 days after the end of lockdown. Considering this situation, it may lead to a situation when all labor migrants who have their documents expired, and there is quite a large number of them in Poland, they may simultaneously go to local migration authorities to prolong their documents or to apply for a new one, and so on. And even before the pandemic, actually local authorities were quite overloaded by the applications for work permits and for residence permits, and waiting for issuing the one could could last for up to 1 year, speaking about long-term residence permits. So these are three possible challenges that may come in after easing the lockdown. Even if there is no second wave of COVID-19, we would like the governments and the responsible authorities to consider some lessons maybe of the current pandemic. Firstly, it's about the bilateral and multilateral cooperation. And the most bright example is actually this issue of penalization on the border, when people who, for example, overstayed in Czech Republic or in Italy are penalized on the Hungarian border because we have this specific European Union situation when all considered countries are under one umbrella of Schengen acquis, but at the same time, each one has its own national system and its own national legislation, and the involuntary overstay in Italy becomes not to say crime, but a violation of the rules in Hungary. Probably the authorities and the governments of these countries should communicate better. The second thing is the necessity in statistics, in observing, in research on the topic of Ukrainian labor migration. I don't think it would be a surprise for the audience, but even the number, for example, of Ukrainian labor migrants is unknown, the exact number. I mean, and it's becomes an object of various numerous speculations of political manipulations and so on. But people like, for example, us with Ruslan, who come to some study, they actually, we had a very little data when we were preparing this study, and we should draw our attention to newspaper publications, to social media groups, to personal interviews, and so on. I think that more statistics and more research on the more data exchange on governmental level is definitely needed. And the other thing is necessity to bring services into online, and it may be one of the responses to the case of migration authorities overload that will also help to avoid the unnecessary contacts between people and preserving social distance and so on. And on this level, I would like to stop and to bring back Ruslan.
Thank you, Pavlo. I would like to continue with the case of seasonal workers, because every country, not only your country, but many countries in the world, they recognized food supply workers and seasonal workers as the essential for countries' economies, because this is the food supply and security of the countries. And European Commission even allowed for seasonal workers from third countries to enter the European Union. In this case, here we would like to focus on Ukrainian seasonal workers in Poland, because from the numbers, as you can see, the greatest number of Ukrainian seasonal workers, they are actually in Poland. According to Eurostat, 45,000 in 2018. This is much more than in the second country, that is Bulgaria, almost 700 people. But not only Poland is important for Ukrainians, it's also the Ukrainians that are important, because on the second graph, as you can see, almost 99% of all seasonal workers here are actually Ukrainians. And right now, from the graph, you see the popular months that are May, June, July. So the need for them is already happening. And there are two ways for them to enter Poland. They can enter with visa and work permit already in hand, or they can enter visa-free for quite some time, and we wrote it in the brief. There was actually the issue that visa-free was not allowed by Poland. Right now, the situation is different. Right now, visa-free seasonal workers can also enter Poland, so this problem is no longer present. And in general, on our opinion, is that the Polish case is kind of a best practice for other countries dealing with seasonal workers, because They can enter, they can stay, even if the documents expire. So this the situation with the legalization, regularization was fixed. Then there is the case of quarantine that was among the hardest, because to stay 14 days in quarantine when you come from Ukraine to Poland and you stay in Poland only 3 months, for instance, and your aim is to earn as much money as you can. Of course, this affected even the desire for some seasonal workers to go to Poland. But this situation is resolved right now. For the authorities in Poland, they allow for workers to work this 14 days in the farm where they work, but they cannot go outside from that circle, so they not contaminate other people in case if they may catch some COVID-19. So they undergo the quarantine for 14 days, but they are working at the same time in the fields during these days. Also, the logistics is now a bit easier. More border posts are open. There are more transport as it was at the beginning of the lockdown. But still, of course, the logistic is still probably the main issue for now. It's, of course, harder than before the lockdowns, but the situation is improving. Also, it's easy even to get the documents because the Polish visa centers and consular workers are open right now, even in Ukraine, specifically targeting the seasonal workers. So this is the least, I would say, the least issue with the seasonal workers, considering all labor migrant group that we have now. Another group that I want to consider right now is the domestic workers in Italy. Why we selected them? Because among the labor migrants, Ukrainian labor migrants here, this group is the biggest one. It is represented mainly by female. About 20% of them are in Lombardia, the region that was most hit by the COVID-19 in Italy. And according to the Italian statistics, the earliest was for 2017. You can see that 62% are occupied in public, seasonal, and personal services, meaning actually that they are domestic workers. Those are the housekeepers, the caregivers, and the babysitters, all three categories. And if, for instance, the situation with caregivers it might be a bit easier because they usually live with the employers in the same apartment or house. The situation with babysitters and housekeepers is a bit different because people were stuck at home, and for them maybe they don't need any more housekeepers or babysitters. In the brief, we outlined some issues that make the life of these people really unbearable during the time of the COVID-19. Now it is easier. The situation improved mostly the last few weeks, actually. And the first improvement is that for the first time, the domestic workers, including Ukrainians, they can receive the targeted pecuniary state help that was not present before. Before, state help for self-employed, for workers in entertainment industry, seasonal even workers, but not for domestic workers. After a few weeks ago, they adopted that the domestic workers can also get the €500 bonus for April and May. Of course, the situation was easing the lockdowns. The fact that from 18th of May, there is no more need for self-declarations and checks on the streets improved the situation, especially for irregular workers, because before that, when you exit your home, you should have the paper self-declaration saying where you go, from which point to which point, why you go. and the police could also ask you the ID. Of course, if you are irregular, if you show your ID, it's you don't have any legal rights to stay there. You can be deported, not during the COVID probably, but later. So some people couldn't even go outside to the supermarket. They asked their neighbors, for instance, but that's not the solution for the time now. This issue is, of course, easier. Another thing is the so-called bonus pesa. This is the vouchers that people can take and buy some food, some hygienic products in the supermarket for them. And a few weeks ago, the court in Rome decided that the residence should not be the prerequisite for that, because many irregular migrants, they do not have the residence, they could not demonstrate that, and so they couldn't get the bonus pesa, this vouchers. Now the court decided, and they can. And of course, the issue with irregular migrants is also easier now because of what Pavlo said, so-called migration amnesty or sanatoria. In Italy, the last time it was done in 2012. Now they also adopted the way to regularize irregular workers. So their legal status and the access to the state help might be better. And why it's important? Because according to Italian Statistic Institute, again 2017, the latest data that we found, about half of all domestic workers were irregular. So they are not only Ukrainian. So this is data about all domestic workers, but that is quite an impressive number. And I think that after these measures, the situation is better, comparable, if we compare to the situation just about a few weeks ago, a month ago. So it is improving. Still remain some weak points that were not fixed yet. Even though domestic workers are considered as essential for the country's economy, they were not among the groups that could not be dismissed. At the beginning of the pandemic, the Italian government adopted the law that actually banned to dismiss the employers for many industries, but domestic workers were not among these people. So they ended up in a situation when, even though they are essential, they can be easily fired. Fortunately, according to the interviews that we conducted with people, with Ukrainian labor migrants in Italy, nobody lost their job. Even in some cases, there were more work to do, and they get some, well, it's not money, not a salary increase, but some premiums they get for working more hours. But that, of course, depends on the industry. That was the logistics, for instance. So they didn't lose their job, but still. So more protection, I would say, more protection would be desirable in the situation of those category of people, of domestic workers in Italy. And the last but not least, I think this is a really important issue, is the information provision. Why it's important? Because the situation develops really quickly. The laws changes every week, basically, and to keep up with all those updates for ordinary people is not that easy. But it's important for them to know and to make the decision to stay in the host country or to leave the host country, to change the job or not, what to do. So to make the well-grounded choice, they must have all the information. And that was not always easy. We have diplomatic missions and consular missions in all the host countries. And for instance, in case of Italy and Hungary, of course, the Ukrainians could reach them via messengers, phone calls, write emails as usually. But the countries like Czech Republic and Poland, they were much more active in providing the information in the language of these people, in Ukrainian, of course, language. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs had a really good initiative called the Protection, but different embassies implemented them in different ways. For instance, Hungary and Italy, they created the group protection in Facebook, and people were writing different things about how to get back home, about the legalization, but mainly the presence of ministry was not very big. In case of Czech Republic and Poland, for instance, they created the Google form even where people can ask the questions about the legalization of stay in case of expired documents, about the return options, about even about the work of supermarkets, chemists, and hospitals. In case of Czech Republic, for instance, there was also a possibility to ask, I lost the job, what can I do? There were also on the web pages and on the social media the frequently asked question option. This is also good for the representatives of consular services because they should not answer the same questions all the time. People can book on the web pages and find the detailed explanation in Ukrainian, and this is the case also for Poland and Czech Republic. And of course, social media, they were actively present there. But of course, there is always room for improvement. I would suggest, for instance, to introduce also the chatbots for the consular services to answer the question and to decrease the overload of questions for the employers of consular services themselves. And this practice is already present in the foreign ministry. They provide the possibility for chatbots for foreigners who want to enter Ukraine and get the documents. So this technology, if I can say, is already present, and it can be also tailored for the needs of not only labor migrants, but in general Ukrainians who are stuck abroad. And of course, the language. And here I would like to talk more about the host country authorities. For short-term migrants, this is of course the issue. The majority of people have no or very restricted knowledge of the host country language. But also for the country like Italy, where the majority of people are long-term migrants, and they actually speak Italian in private, the majority of them, and almost all of them at work. Still, according to the surveys, about 70% people say that they face some difficulties. So more information, even by the host country authorities in the native language of the group that has a big presence in the country of labor migrants, would be a good policy. And this is the case for Poland, for instance, and Czech Republic. They provide the information about the new rules for foreigners, also in Ukrainian, also other languages like Russian, English, and other languages. But it is present also in Ukraine. And this is, of course, important for people to make the right decision. And this decision affects what is going on the ground and the crowds on the border posts, because often, especially at the beginning of the lockdown, the reaction was a bit not adequate, in a sense that the people were not aware about the options that they have, about the fact that the documents that expired can be considered, they can continue their legal stay despite this fact. Some people just didn't know, and those people, for instance, who came back from Poland, many of them said that they came back because their documents expired. They came back to renew the documents, and now they come back to Poland after the consular services opened, and they renew the documents. But they could stay there and find a job there, and continue to earn some money. That's the main aim why they go there, right? So yes, I think I should stop here, and if you have questions and answers, we are ready to answer.